Fantastic. Can see the participants starting to fill up now. So thank you to anyone who's joined us nice and early. Just going to give it a minute or so just for the participants to filter in. You can see there obviously on the title slide, some really interesting content coming up for you delivered by BeautyPie, where we're going to be looking at the use of Next.js and chakraui to create next-gen e-commerce experiences. Just in terms of the house rules for today, please do try and use the Q&A feature rather than raising your hand or the chat feature. It's very hard for us to kind of stop mid-presentation to raise hands. If you do get your questions into Q&A, we'll do our very best to get through them during this session. But the good thing is we get those questions logged. So even if we don't get around to your question, as long as you've used that Q&A feature, we'll have access to it and we'll be able to follow up with an answer afterwards. In terms of how it'll work following the webinar, so we will follow up tomorrow morning with an email. So if you have missed any of the content, or like I said, if you have any questions that weren't answered, we'll be able to kind of provide that content tomorrow. And yeah, we'll provide a lot more details, of course, on how you can get in touch with BeautyPie if you like the sound of what you've heard. So just going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll hand over to Carl for some introductions. Fantastic. Lovely. Cool. Notice we've had a few more join us. Just to reiterate, please try and use the Q&A function rather than the raising hand or the chat function. It's much easier for us to get through to your questions and make sure that we can get you all the answers that you'd like. Great. So look, without further ado, I'll hand over to Carl for some introductions, and yeah, we can get cracking with the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Phil and Daisy. Thanks for inviting us along this week to present what we're up to in BeautyPie. Hopefully it's going to be an interesting session where we're going to focus on some of the new investments in innovation we've been doing recently over the last 6 months, actually, in BeautyPie. But before we do that, I thought some helpful introductions. Myself, I'll be covering some high-level kind of strategy of what we're doing from an engineering perspective and why. I'll hand off to Shai, and then Redian can walk through some of the technical details. So we do introductions first. So yeah, I joined BeautyPie last August to head up all the engineering. Shai, do you want to do a quick intro first?
Yeah, so I'm Shai. I joined as a product manager last September, and I'm looking at the discovery side of the whole shopping experience.
And Redian?
Hello, I'm Redian. I'm one of the tech leads here at BeautyPie. I joined in September last year and building the new platform for BeautyPie with awesome tech.
Thank you, Redian, Shai. So let's crack on then. So yeah, BeautyPie. So I guess first, I think it's helpful before we get into all the details of the technical elements of Next.js and Chakra, to just put things into some context first around what we're trying to do in BeautyPie. I mean, I'd never heard of BeautyPie before I joined, so it isn't a well-known brand yet, although we are still quite big. We're about 5 years old. So I'll go through some of the concepts of what we're trying to do. And then I think it's really important before we get into the details of the technology we're using is to put that in the context from a product perspective, as in BeautyPie is a very, very, very customer-centric organization. And so how do we align our technology to what our customers are needing within our sector? And again, Shai can walk us through some of the main drivers from a product and customer perspective, which drove us to choose Next.js and Chakra. But before we go there, let me just walk through then a little bit more about what BeautyPie are up to and what our goals are as an organization. So the first one, quite a brazen image there, but the first one actually is more around my background. I've been in fintech for the last 20 years. And if I look back 20 years ago, the relationship and the industry of where fintech is actually very similar to where cosmetics is today, in that there's some very large conglomerates, as fintech was 20 years ago, who dominated the industry and had a very poor relationship with consumers, as in the consumer had a bad deal effectively. And that in fintech was reflected in a low net promoter score, as in would somebody recommend their bank or financial institution to a friend? On the whole, it wasn't. It was dominated by large institutions who had a bad relationship. And that industry has changed significantly over the last 10 or 20 years. And so lots more financial service organizations, a lot more customer-centric organizations like the Monzos, and a lot, I think, fair relationship between a consumer of a service, financial service, and a provider. The industry's changed significantly. But if I look at what the beauty and the cosmetic industry is today, it's actually not that dissimilar, as in there's some really large conglomerates who dominate the industry, and their relationship with consumers is a very one-sided thing. And that means that a consumer, you could argue, has got a bad deal, as in they're paying 3, 4, 5, sometimes $600 for a cosmetics product, a cream, where actually that cream only costs 10 or 20 bucks to actually manufacture. And so the consumer is paying a huge amount of money for largely branding and marketing the machine of cosmetics. And what Beauty Pie is trying to do, which is kind of reflected in this image, is saying we want to change that. We want to disrupt this industry and have a lot fairer relationship with consumers. And that means that by offering products to consumers at a fair price, I think that's a fairer relationship for cosmetics to access luxury products, which today is kind of only available to a small subset of the consumer industry. How do we do that? We do that through kind of a membership model. You join as a member to this kind of a club effectively, and you can access products at a lower price, typically 80% less than the high street. A little bit more about Beauty Pie. So we're about a 5-year-old business. Again, not necessarily a startup in business terms, being 5-year-old, but very much a startup in terms of our product engineering and technology. And you'll see some of that as we walk through today, some of the technologies we've chosen. Why 5 years? I mean, an industry of cosmetics takes time to adopt a brand. You remember, you're putting this thing on your skin, so it takes time to build trust and affinity to a brand before you gain any level of momentum to create a reasonable sized business. And so, again, Beauty Pie is still very early on in that compared to the addressable market of $1 trillion market cosmetics. But we are, you know, a reasonable sized business even after 5 years. We are a direct to consumer business, so an e-commerce business. We only resell our branded beauty products. We're about 100 people in Beauty Pie at the moment, all based in the UK, although we have operations in the UK and North America. And again, growing really fast in both markets, like all e-commerce brands are at the moment, again, given the environment we're in. And so we have been through some significant growth. We are a mobile first, typically. We've got a huge mobile adoption. Typically 70% of all our shoppers are using mobile. So again, it's not that dissimilar. I think we're really pushing one of the generally mobile first consumers in e-commerce in a really interesting space, because what makes it interesting for us from an engineering perspective is, you know, e-commerce, you know, there's loads and loads of e-commerce sites out there, from the Amazons that are the best in class, say, or the John Lewis have got a great user experience. But a lot of e-commerce sites aren't in our position where they sell habitual products, as in cosmetics. And why does that make us different? It means that we can collect so much more data on a consumer around their purchase behavior, their browsing behavior, all that attribution around their individual skin types and things. We can then use that data to create a really acute personalized experience from an engineering perspective using data science and all those other techniques. And compared to like the Amazons who are trying to do personalization, they just don't know enough about me. I use Amazon a lot, but they don't know enough about me because my range of purchasing are really broad. So they don't really know what's right for me because it's such a broad purchase. Whereas in cosmetics and a repeat purchase nature of a membership model like Beauty Pie, the level of innovation we can do on personalization is really acute. And that's going to create lots of opportunity to do lots more engineering that lots of e-commerce businesses would love to be in, but we're in a very, very unique position. That's for a future presentation, and when we get to that, today is all around our storefront. And so I'm going to hand over to Shai now, and she can walk you through again from a product perspective how we are very much a customer-driven storefront, and how do we align our business needs to the technology needs underneath. So Shai, over to you.
Thanks, Carl. So as Carl mentioned before, just earlier, we have a really big base of customers which access our site via mobile. It's about 70%. Though of that 70% though, we actually have 70% roughly who are using an iOS device. So we take a predominantly mobile first approach through our design and implementation, but also bearing in mind that it needs to work across multiple devices. You can go to the next slide, Carl, please.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should have mentioned. Yeah. So my bad. I handed over too soon. So yeah, given this, the market is, especially in technology, new technology is coming into the industry, and a lot of the things I find are often misunderstood or misused. And so really the context of today, sorry, my bad, was really to put things into context around trying to clarify what these technologies are. And I call that a few of them here, between what responsive is, progressive, adaptive, contentful painting, organic search. There's lots of things that people talk about in technology. Again, how do we choose the right technology for us? And these are very much from a design perspective and user perspective. But then when you fold in, well, how do we achieve that through Vue or Chakraui or React or Next and Gatsby? There's loads of other options out there. How did we define, okay, well, these are what we're going to use and why within BeautyPie? Sorry, my bad, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I mentioned about the adoption of a mobile first approach, but the next consideration really is loading speed. So there's a widely quoted study by the Aberdeen group that found that a 1 second delay in page load time equals about 11% fewer page views, 16% decrease in customer satisfaction, and 7% loss in conversion. So when looking at page load speed of our current site, we also saw that sessions which bounced had a 2 second longer page load than those which didn't. So you can see here why technology clearly has a huge impact on how BeautyPie performs. So other things such as making the site highly discoverable, with zero friction for the user to find what they need to purchase, making it a safe place to visit and enter their personal information, and allowing them to be able to shop wherever and from whatever device. So these are all important considerations when choosing our tech stack. Next slide, please. So one of these decisions was whether we should be adapted or responsive in our design. So these are two methods for how websites are viewed across different sizes and types of devices. Whilst they are similar, they have pros and cons to each. So customers come essentially to shop from many different devices and browsers, and they expect to view a website that is beautiful, works well, doesn't have any errors, and has a great shopping experience. But in order to have achieve the site, that should be optimized for the device that the customer is using. So for example, a mobile customer's website needs to be designed for a touchscreen interface where buttons are used to navigate, and swiping in different directions is more common than scrolling. That's completely different on a desktop. So one of the main challenges really of designing for a mobile website though is translating the content that you would typically fit on a much larger screen to a much smaller interface. So an adaptive design website creates multiple fixed layout, one for each device type and size. So Amazon, like you see here, it's a really good example of an adaptive design where it basically gives you a completely different experience depending on if you're viewing it on your desktop versus your mobile versus tablet, and even via the app. As I'm sure a lot of you guys use Amazon, you can see that the difference is the experience is very different depending on how you're accessing Amazon. So things like images and videos can be removed, for instance, on devices with not so good internet to speed up the load time of the site. And then in contrast, the responsive web design is where the content is the same and the website just responds essentially to the device. And so the position of the images and text just either stack or like change according to how you want it, but the information generally is there the same. So Starbucks is the example here where they've chosen a responsive design route, and the placement of the images change from desktop to mobile, as you can see. So at BeautyPie though, what we've done is we've opted for a responsive design. As for the size of the company we are currently, adaptive design actually requires a lot more people to maintain it because there are a lot of different versions of the website. Screen sizes and devices constantly change, and it can be difficult to keep all of this. So by having a responsive design website, it should help us cater for the ever-changing market of devices. Next slide, please. So another decision was whether we go with progressive versus a regular web app. And really there are a lot of pros, and it's hard to argue why you wouldn't want to go with a progressive web app versus regular at BeautyPie. So progressive web apps really work for every user regardless of the browser, and it gives you a lot of richer features. So they are responsive. They're generally faster than a regular web app after the initial load is done, and it allows for offline use on low quality networks. And it feels like the app allows to basically handle the app style interaction, such as push notifications, and is also like very easily discoverable by search engines and more. So, however, from what I said at the beginning, most of our users are on iOS devices. 70% of the 70% of mobile users are on iOS, so it's quite a huge chunk of those users. And although progressive web is well adopted on Android, it is actually lagging behind on iOS. So it may actually mean that a lot of our customers will miss out on this like rich and engaging experience. Other organizations like us, as is George Fashion and Starbucks, have shown progressive web can drive double-digit increases in acquisition. But in the end, we chose progressive web app given all these benefits, but maybe one day we will need to release a native app for our Apple customers if iOS are slow to introduce more support for progressive web apps. Next, thank you. So for the part of the site we've moved over already, we can see that our Lighthouse score is much better than that of a leading global e-commerce site. Why is this important? So Lighthouse is actually developed by Google, and with Google taking about 90% of the search engine market, and that uses your Lighthouse score as a ranking factor, it really makes sense to make sure you're optimized for it so that your site is highly discoverable and you can drive that organic traffic through to your site. And that's it. I'll pass it over to Ridian and he'll go through the other choices that we've made.
Great, thanks, Shai. Yeah, so as Shai mentioned, we decided to go for a progressive web app approach on the web applications that we're building at the moment. We're taking an incremental approach. Obviously, we're trying to stay away from a big bang migration to the existing shopfront. So we're slicing the project into smaller pieces and introducing them incrementally while having also good monitoring tools and instrumentation in place so that we are aware of the effect of the new changes that we're making to the site. In order for us to get closer to the desired user experience in terms of performance and speed, as Shai mentioned, those are very important factors, especially now with the introduction of Core Web Vitals as determining factors by Google in their search engine as elements that will determine our ranking depending on the performance of our website. We decided to go for majority of our static content. We've decided to go with static site generation, meaning preparing the HTML pages up front and sharing them with the clients interested. As this slide shows, there's different approaches to the way how you can serve HTML to browser. First one is the client-side rendered, which most of us are probably familiar with single page applications becoming mainstream a few years ago, introduced by the JavaScript frameworks out there. A server-side rendering where a request making it to the server will get handled and the HTML and CSS and everything, the assets are bundled in on the server side on the fly, and the response is sent to the user. And the static site generation where the markup is prepared, potentially cached as well at CDN level, and provided to the client as quickly as possible. This hopefully reduces the round trip time of your request the server and back to the browser. Can we move on to the next one, please? Right. So in order for us to achieve optimal performance from an application perspective, we decided to go with Next.js, which is a React framework. It has a great developer experience, and these are some of the reasons why we chose Next.js. Great developer experience, internationalization built in. It offers a hybrid approach in which you can choose to, you can opt in and out depending on the need, on the needs that we have for rendering. So we have SSR, server-side rendering, SSG, static side generation, ISG, incremental static generation, and these techniques can be, as mentioned, can be chosen depending on a use case. For our case, for example, for the blog content pages, it's mainly static content. So we chose to go for SSG and ISG. Primarily the ISG bit was used purely because of our editor or content writers experience, especially when they create new content, would like to offer them the ability to preview a blog post before they publish it. So this is the main reason why we are using ISG in this case. Smart bundling, automatic code splitting, tree shaking, and all the nice automatic optimizations that we get by Next.js, and these are quite nice, like benefits in a way you get out of the box, and they keep on being added on a daily basis by the Next team. They do a tremendous job. The community also does a very good job. TypeScript support. TypeScript, as we all know, has its pros and cons, but generally it helps us create applications that are deterministic and hopefully catch as much issues as possible during build time rather than runtime. Images are very important to Beautify, and we need to care about them and handle them with caution, because they can be if not handled properly, they can be detrimental to the user experience. So say for example, if you serve a 10 megabyte image to a mobile device with limited connectivity internet, it could affect the user experience. So Next Image component does a very good job in optimizing the images, and it's serving the right image for the right viewport, as well as lazy loading out of the box, which is a very nice feature. We are integrating with Contentful as a headless CMS that drives our content, and we require an ability to be able to, for our content editors, to be able to preview content, and Next.js in conjunction with Contentful handle that quite nicely with the ability between the two to fetch draft content, which is not in published state yet. Yeah, lots of other optimization out of the box, and in our case, it was quite quickly to get our POCs in a demoable state by just using the virtual platform when working on Next.js. Next slide, please. Chakraui was another interesting choice. We experimented with a few approaches. One of them was Tailwind as well. Chakraui was another. Also, just writing our own CSS. And interestingly enough, when we did in our initial POC, which was a product listing page, Chakra actually performed better than Tailwind, weirdly enough, in terms of accessibility and performance. Although it produced a bit bigger bundle size, as Tailwind had the bird CSS configurations, which reduced the bundle size, the CSS bundle size quite a bit. But Chakra, on the other hand, had some very nice performance when it comes to accessibility and the rendering on screen. And these tests were done using PageSpeed Insights. Our North Star, when we were deciding which library to go for, which approach to go for, was to to empower our developers to be able to write and compose UI interfaces without having to write a whole lot of JavaScript. So in the Chakra case, you start components pretty much by passing in props. Those are just React components that you can make their look and feel differently by passing in the desired props. And a nice bit of it is that it's TypeScript compliant, which helps with minimizing the cognitive load in terms of figuring out what props do you need to pass into what component. Accessibility, yeah, Chakra is W3C and access and WAI, I think, the web accessibility standard. Compliant, it's relatively simple. It has a learning curve. In our case, there was a bit of a learning curve in the beginning for most of our developers who weren't familiar with it. Built on top of style systems and emotion for theming. It has some very nice defaults, great documentation, and it allowed us to create our own sort of UI toolkit in a relatively short period of time, and that tied in quite nicely with Storybook and Grammatic, which allowed us to document our components and test them in isolation as well. Move on to the next one. In terms of quality, how do we ensure quality when we develop? Pair programming is very much a process or an activity that is very much encouraged in our team. Peer reviews, developers work in their own development environments and push their code to GitHub, open their pull requests, and other peers in our team teams review them and suggest improvements if necessary. Unit testing, we're using Jest and React testing library, visual UI component testing, Storybook and Grammatic, functional visual div testing, Cypress, and we're in the process of also doing some physical device testing on browser stack. Performance testing, as mentioned, Lighthouse. We have Lighthouse integrated in our CI/CD pipeline that runs against every pull request, which triggers a build and a deployment in an ephemeral environment where features are deployed in isolation and can be demoed and tested by product and stakeholders. Functional load testing is done using K6 and artillery. Static code analysis via SonarQube. It's quite nice to try and catch simple code smells or other optimization opportunities that could be caught by static code analysis. Our CI/CD pipeline is built on GitHub Actions and Terraform. So most of our automation is done in GitHub Actions. Continuous delivery, yes. So developers work on local machines, engineers pair on certain tasks. The feature branch is created, a pull request is open. One thing to mention here as well, each feature branch or each environment will also get a corresponding flown environment in Contentful. This allows us to test and to apply schema and content changes as necessary for our feature branches in isolation without affecting the main environment in Contentful. This is purely from a content perspective. And once all the everything is tested and we're happy with, we then merge the feature branch into the main branch, which triggers another migration process that applies all the migration changes to the new environment, which is a clone of the main environment. And then once everything is complete, there's a alias switching, which allows us to deploy with zero downtime, pretty much deployments on the content and the front end side of things. So yeah, we have, as the PR is open, we have a series of work that, a series of a sequence of tasks that happens for this particular pull request. So we have unit tests, linting, we have type checking, end-to-end tests. We have the sonar cube code analysis. The storybook gets built and published on Chromatic, and Chromatic runs the UI tests on that build. We obviously also have the integration with Vercel, and we deploy our branches into a feature preview environment, which can be shared with the business and the stakeholders to test before they go into production. As soon as the pull request is merged, so this is very much a trunk-based sort of development. As soon as the pull request is merged, that feature makes it to production or live production deployment pipeline. Next one, please. Right, so that was a bit about our technology and choices and how we're doing things. Yeah, happy with, let's see, Phil, message me.
Thank you,
to move on to the questions part.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely, lovely. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. I think we've got some really in-depth information there on, really kind of lifting the bonnet on what's going on. So really nice to see. So I think a nice question to start with, I think, ease us in, is we've had a question come in which is asked kind of what attracted you to Beauty Pie in the first place? I think, Carl, you kind of alluded to it. I think, often with the kind of cosmetics industry, maybe not the type of company people would think about as a tech-first business, but looking there under the hood, clearly are using a lot of modern technology. So yeah, what was it that kind of drew you into Beauty Pie at the start? Carl, if we can go to you first.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Because my reaction was very similar, as in my perception was it's going to be like a Shopify implementation with some configuration. This doesn't sound like an interesting kind of innovation space, but I soon changed that perception when I kind of understood the sector we're in. Again, they're in that opportunity to disrupt. This is a huge industry driven and dominated by conglomerates. Again, very similar to where fintech was 15, 20 years ago. And that opportunity to disrupt in a space which there aren't that many players in actually is quite a unique opportunity. Like going back to the fintech days. Beauty Pie also late last year, Marcia, the founder of Beauty Pie, she's also founder of lots of other cosmetics industries, but in general, she's done that herself. Beauty Pie is different because of the scale of the opportunity, and two of the world's biggest VCs are backing us as of the Series A in late last year, so Index and Boulderton. And that, again, puts us in a quite unique position, as in we're in a space that's ripe for disruption with very few other competitors, backed by two of the world's biggest VCs, with an addressable market of $1 trillion. Sounds like an interesting space to actually do some interesting innovation. And when I overlay that with the types of, for example, personalization we can do, and just one example of the types of things we'd like to do within Beauty Pie, again, there aren't many spaces that allow you that kind of opportunity in London. I've been part of lots of really fast growing organizations, again, in financial services. So that was, for me, quite a unique opportunity to be part of, and what attracted me to Beauty Pie, which is, again, very different than a cosmetics e-commerce brand using Shopify. That's definitely not what we are. We're a lot more than that. And the amount of innovation we're going to be able to do in this space is going to be really unique.
Fantastic, excellent. And Shai, same question to you.
Yeah, so I actually knew what Beauty Pie was before I applied for a role here, and I've always been interested in skincare and the products, and I do believe a lot in that their products are really good and their model as well. And I had come from actually a background of fintech and logistics and storage, and being in my role, it's really important to understand a user's mindset when they come to wherever it is that you're obviously managing. But for me, like, Beauty Pie was something that I could quite easily relate to. And a lot of traditional beauty companies actually don't have a lot of these roles available, especially in London. And so I was really keen to kind of get into that kind of sector. And the opportunity of kind of starting the team, because Carl Reddy and I all joined last year, and that's kind of like the beginnings of the product engineering team, and that opportunity to be able to like grow a team and like grow with it and have that like space to kind of be a bit more free rather than come into a company that has had a team that's been established for tens of years and then just have to kind of like take over aspects of it. So I think that kind of opportunity of being able to really take the reins and take control and make the decisions really attracted me to working there, as well as obviously Marcia having founded many successful companies, and her track record is like successful in everything, basically. It's kind of like, you know, it seemed like a good bet to go to as well. So yeah, I've really kind of enjoyed it so far, about challenging myself, learning about new technologies and seeing like how we can grow the business. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Redin, same question to you. Not always the easiest to answer once two people have already gone. But yeah, it'd be great to get your take as well.
Mine is simpler. Yeah, the reason why I joined was Carl. I worked with Carl in a previous gig, and yeah, I very much enjoyed his structured, focused vision of not losing track of what's important when building a product. And in addition to that, the challenge of building something greenfield, you know, from the ground up and building it hopefully the right way, and also challenging the status quo. I like challenging projects in general.
Fantastic, excellent. No, I think it sounds like a really, really nice summary. Obviously, the backing of good financial backing, stable company, but a real opportunity to come in and have an impact, which I think is something that a lot of people out there are looking for. Shai, if I could come back to you. Obviously, you mentioned there it's kind of a nice head start when you already kind of understand the user mindset. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on how you go to kind of further that understanding, what sort of data collection methods you use, and how do you kind of get the understanding of the end user?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of data available to us. We collect our data using a data lake called Snowflake, and we've got a whole data team basically that's being formed and growing as well. So again, if you're interested in working in data, then I think we've got quite a few open roles there too. So we use Google Analytics as well, but we're adopting Tableau as well as kind of like the way that people will kind of go for all of that information, and kind of really trying to consolidate that information, because as you can imagine, like a company with loads of members has a lot of data, so we need to find the source of truth for all of this. So Tableau is kind of what we're trying to work towards and getting that. We do a lot of user testing these days to figure out what users actually prefer. So instead of just running like a standard like A/B test on the site, what we would do a lot of is actually just use user testing as a tool, and we would just like put together a quick mock-up to like 5-10 users or so, just to get a sense of whether this is the right direction we're going for. Yeah. Fantastic,
excellent. And it'd be great to give people a little bit more of an idea of kind of the structure of the team. So Carl, maybe this is one for you. How are the teams structured? Do you kind of go along a kind of cross-functional model? Or?
Yeah, so I was the first person in product engineering. So in 5 years, BeautyPie have grown very much from a wet product development perspective to build kind of the products they sell, which they call the SKUs, the barcodes on the products they sell. And all the engineering had been done on a nearshore agency who was specialist in a certain technology that we adopted up to that point. And so really, we've been really lucky to then say, okay, well, starting from zero, how do we want to form our future engineering from the stuff that Redin's walked through there in terms of our notions of continuous integration and delivery. And so fundamentally trying to automate everything we do so we can focus our energy on adding value, not fighting with CI and testing and things like that. But how we organize the teams is a really important element of it. And what we do is order them by value stream effectively. So cross-functional teams around an area of value within our organization. So for example, if I look at where our focus is at the moment, it's very much we are a growing young organization. So acquisition, like any young organization, is a really important part of our growth. And so our teams are aligned around, well, our business objectives, or OKRs, I think people use a lot. As in, we have a number of teams now. Product engineering is around 40 odd people, of which we're aligning top of funnel, as in the business problems they're trying to solve as a new customer coming to BeautyPie is actually product discovery. How do we help a consumer find the products that are right for them when we don't really know that much about the consumer because they aren't yet members? And so curating and understanding how the consumer can discover products using a bunch of innovation is a big part of that team's kind of North Star. Through to then bottom of the funnel team, again, a different value stream, because they are, hey, we've got a customer with some products in our bag. How do we convert those to be paying members and join as a member? Yeah. And they've got different kind of business objectives and different types of innovation they want to do to try and again, oil the bottom of the funnel. And that's just two examples around how teams are aligned around value. I could describe similar ones for retention as well. Obviously, we want people to join and use and shop. And how do we use all the rich data we have through like data science and AI and things to curate the user experience so that they can not necessarily cross-sell, although that's probably part of what we'd like to do. It's just like there's no point serving content to a consumer who's got dry skin. We can have a huge influence on understanding the data and consumer so we can serve content and curate their user experience that's right for them. Again, which makes this quite a unique opportunity that, again, Amazon tried to do. They argue that every user's got their own homepage, but it's a really blunt tool for personalization, whereas we've got a very different opportunity purely because we've got so much information we have learned about our consumers. And so, yeah, aligning teams around that is equally as important. But to answer your question, yeah, it's cross-functional vertical teams are aligned around a value stream within our organization.
Fantastic, excellent. Yeah, and again, I think that's something that a lot of developers out there are looking for. You get that experience, that knowledge share within the teams. That's fantastic to hear. Redin, if I could come to you quickly, obviously you mentioned pair programming there during your presentation. How kind of frequently would you pair programming during an average week? And is that something that you use in your interview process as well, or is that just the data for the day-to-day work?
Yeah, so our pair programming approach is less religious as a few other companies in the development in the industry in the UK. Some companies take to the extreme and they say pair programming 100%. In our case, we leave it to the developers to decide. Okay. Generally speaking, on tasks that are medium to high complexity tasks, pair programming is very much advised and suggested and encouraged. While if it's a copy change or something really minute, then there is much value in pair programming. So it's up to the developer really. In terms of the interview process, yes. So we do have our approach is a collaborative approach where the candidate sits for a certain period of time with one or generally two of their future colleagues, and they go through a couple of JavaScript exercises together. We don't like algorithmic brain teasers. So what we provide is more few relatively simple tasks that are closer to the reality, as in what do we do on a daily basis, rather than mathematical, challenging, algorithmic stuff that could potentially be, intimidating, and sometimes, it can stress the candidate more. So we're very much aware of the, nerves that and the stress that the interview process can, how nervous a candidate can be. And we try to make that as collaborative as possible in terms of a pair programming exercise where the candidate is the driver and the future colleagues are the navigators, basically helping out in the form of questions during the process.
Grand. Thank you very much. Yeah, and look, I think that mirrors definitely the conversations. So obviously at HackerJob, we speak to a lot of people on a weekly basis around interview processes and things, and I think that mirrors kind of the best practice from a candidate side in particular. I think when you give someone a kind of real life challenge, something that's going to be relevant to the role, and also they have that experience of, okay, what's it like to work with these people? I think it's a really good kind of selling point.
Absolutely. It's a two-way thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a process where we in a way review the competency mainly in the JavaScript side. We are very much JavaScript focused across all our stack, apart from infrastructure, Terraform. Everything else is JavaScript, TypeScript, and the other way around as well, where the candidate can see their future colleagues and determine whether this is the right place for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Cool. So, Chai, it'd be great to come to you on this one. So, as disruptors in your industry, are you experiencing or do you anticipate any pushback from the big brands and/or traditional distributors? That's from Richard Brockback.
Disruptions from big brands. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't think we are quite there in terms of our size. I think the way that we're definitely like going in terms of our growth, that we will start seeing people noticing us a bit more, but we are still a growing company that's scaling, and we've got a lot of growth to do to compete with the likes of like the top dog like companies out there who have a lot more of a base than we do. But there are definitely smaller companies out there which do similar-ish to what we do, but in a different space. There's a company called like Everlane, they don't have a membership, but they effectively do this whole transparency pricing similar to what we do, and only charge like a small markup on top of the products they sell. Which is quite similar to us, but they've kind of tackled it in a different way. There are other companies similar as well in the athletics space called Fabletics, and they have a bit of a membership model. Whether we are quite there for the disruptors to notice us, I'm not sure, but I definitely think like give it a year or two and they probably will start noticing us much more.
Yeah, I think that the growth so far of the company's been fantastic. And I think that goes hand in hand with joining the business where you can have that impact and you can have all that fantastic exposure that we've already been talking about. Cool. It'd be great to come to you, Carl, on this one. So, question from Calvin Crane: are you creating an e-commerce engine for the backend from scratch, managing thousands of orders per day, not to mention all the sundries such as coupons, customer management, and payment gateways? So, yeah, are you building that in-house?
So our architecture is very much around composable architecture, as in what we want to do is, well, where is the value in our organization, and what's unique about Beauty Pie, and where is that fundamentally the IP, because we're trying to build a huge amount of value to deliver on the business. But we're also trying to do that pace, and we've moved incredibly fast over the last 6 months to build some really, really interesting technology. But building takes time. So it's always around a build by open source kind of decisions. And so for us, it's the decisions are around, well, is this an agnostic service? If it is an agnostic service and there's something out there that can meet that need because it's agnostic, like, I don't know, CRM or Salesforce, we'd never think about building Salesforce ourselves. There's a tool off the shelf that does CRM. We'd use something like that, although we don't use Salesforce. And so the decisions are very much around, well, is there any unique IP value in doing this? And if there is, then we'd likely build it ourselves or use some open source technology, but more than likely build. So for example, around our unique membership, again, not many e-commerce businesses in our space have a membership model. And a lot of the stuff that we want to innovate on is around membership and types of membership, and how do we kind of bring members into our world to get all the benefits. That's something we're likely to build. But to answer your question around like e-commerce services, no, it's pretty agnostic from the market out there, in that many of them will manage a catalog, and those catalogs for ours isn't that big compared to some of the large multinationals. We've got maybe 400 or 500 SKUs. A SKU is a product line, effectively. Yep. Allows a customer to find that product using search, and there's loads of other agnostic search services out there that probably a lot better than what we would want to build ourselves, through to then add to your bag and check out. So that e-commerce journey, actually, it's been solved many, many times before, and so there's very little business value in us building all that ourselves, really, especially in our stage of the business when pace is important too. But there is a huge amount of value in building other things. Like today's all around the storefront, we want to own and build the user experience, because that's where there's a huge amount of innovation that we can do for the customer facing elements of it. And we talked about a few technologies here, but translating that into a lot different digital relationship with a consumer. And again, there's loads of ideas we want to do that. Obviously we want to own that, and we're going to build that. But there's other elements we call back-end elements. So I guess personalization is a big part of that. We want to own and build that, because again, that's quite unique to our business. So that's kind of how we kind of distinguish between where we want to invest in building and where we want to invest in buying or using off the shelf.
Fantastic. Yeah, makes total sense. Excellent. Redian, to come to you again. So I think one of the really interesting slides you showed was kind of the whole CI/CD pipeline, internal automation piece. Who's kind of responsible for that within the business? Do you have like a defined DevOps engineer role that deals with the internal automation? Yeah, it'd be good to get your take on it.
We do. We are fortunate enough to have DevOps engineers allocated to each team. So as Carl mentioned, our teams are cross-functional, vertical teams that own a certain part of the funnel. That means the storefront, the backend. By the way, we are on the new platform. We're using GraphQL for our backend to drive our data, and our data layer, basically the data aggregation layer, where the teams are composed of front-end, full stack, and DevOps engineers, but it's not solely a DevOps engineer responsibility. It's a team-wide responsibility, and any developer can change the GitHub Actions workflows if they need to, depending on the need. And we are, in a way, we have the luxury of having also DevOps engineers in our teams to help us go through that process together. Excellent. Very often we pair together.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Jay, I think this one is probably most suitable for you. So Mike Mitchell has dropped a question just saying, how much of the visual design, i.e. user interface, look and feel aspect of Beauty Pie site is done in the UK, and who drives the design direction?
Yeah, so everything pretty much is done in the UK. We have a whole design team actually that leads this design direction, and we also have a studio team that help out with obviously all the branding and making sure everything is on point. So yeah, within kind of each, I guess, Scrum team you would call it, we have a designer. So we have a UX lead, and then we've got a bunch of UX designers working on different projects at the same time, and they really are responsible for driving the kind of the design direction that we want to go in, and working very closely with studio to make sure that is correct, and also with the new product development team who are going to like design the actual physical products, because obviously you kind of have to make sure that experience from the physical product to the actual site and the images that go with it all flow nicely together to create that one like brand image. So yeah, like a lot of that's all. The whole team is in the UK actually. We have a couple of people in the US, but none of the core team really. So yeah, all for the UK.
Lovely, excellent. And Carl, if we come to you, so obviously you mentioned during your process, obviously there's a really kind of broad tech selection process. Obviously people can come in and have that impact. You obviously use the best tool for the job. If you could just maybe elaborate a little bit on how do you actually choose the tech? How do those conversations go? How does that process go when kind of onboarding a new tool?
On the whole, I mean, one of the most important things I value again is pace of decisions, but trusting and empowering teams on those decisions as well. So a lot of the things, if I take, for example, the process of selection for the first elements of our storefront. So what did we need to decide there? So how did we, because up to that point, the storefront was served by an old legacy IBM tool. We wanted to decouple that and have a separate storefront. So the decisions were made largely by the team, and through somewhat their experience, but also through prototyping at pace as well. How could we decide with a reasonable high level of confidence these are right technologies for us? So some of them, like the GraphQL layer, we knew we had to have some layer of abstraction between kind of our clients, our headless services, they call them in e-commerce, but APIs effectively. So the e-commerce API, the content API from our content management platforms, and others around assets, like we use a tool called Binder for managing all our digital assets like images and videos. So how did we choose those different tools? But actually, we're in quite a fortunate position because we are backed by Index and Balderton. So we had direct access to the rest of their portfolio, and we're quite lucky that they were also backers of other content management platforms. So so we had direct access to chat to that team through our Index kind of VC. So Contentful, Balderton is backing of Contentful. We looked at Strappy as well and a few other ones. And again, that allowed us to accelerate those decisions with confidence by accessing network, because we could speak to the COO of Strappy and understand exactly was that a good fit for our business or not, alongside prototyping the technology. And it just allowed us to make decisions a lot faster because we had access to a large network of not so, wrong word, trusted, but you get my point, is direct knowledge within that platform, whereas we didn't have to go through the sales kind of platform. We had direct access, which helped a hell of a lot. So it's kind of a mix between trusting the teams, using their experience, using our network within technology, but fundamentally we did loads of prototyping as well. So it's not necessarily just understanding from a capability perspective and talking, but it's also using and working. Can it work within how we want to work in terms of continuous delivery and integration and all the other elements of technology that we want to build in our really modern ways of working? And that's kind of how we landed it. But really quickly, actually, between September and the end of the year, we'd chosen our technology. We'd built all our blogs. So if you look on the live site today on Beauty Pie on blogs, that's all served on Next.js and Chakra. With all the underlying technology of Contentful and Binder, and that was built within 8-10 weeks. And so that pace was really important to us because we can move at pace because we had access to knowledge to be able to make tool selections.
Fantastic, excellent. I think really good roundup to end the session there. So I think I heard lots of really great information today. I think really nice to see some of the modern kind of cutting edge tech that's being used, but also the impact that a candidate coming in could have on the business. So I think really fantastic opportunity from that perspective. In terms of the hiring side of things, I know BeautyPie are hiring within the data teams, DevOps team, and within the kind of development teams and product management teams at the moment. So if you are interested, if you've heard some great information today and want to follow up, as I said, we will be reaching out to all of you tomorrow morning with an email, just to summarize the webinar, answer some of the questions, and provide some more details on how you can get in touch if it sounds of interest. So look, I'd just like to thank all of our speakers today, Chai, Carl, Redian, and yeah, wish you all a very good evening and see you all soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.